Good evening. Welcome to the Tuesday, August 29th, 2023 regular meeting of the Stoughton School Committee. This meeting is being recorded by SMAC for future broadcasting. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The first item on our agenda is public comment. The public comment portion of the meeting shall not exceed 15 minutes. Citizens of the district will be allowed up to 3 minutes to make their statement. Citizens will speak in the order in which they sign up. Public comment is not a discussion, debate, or dialogue between individuals and the school committee. It's an opportunity for a citizen to express an opinion on a topic within the school committee's authority. The authority of the school committee primarily concerns the Stoughton Public School budget, the performance of the superintendent, and the educational goals and policies of the district's public schools. The first person we have on the list is Michael Owens. If you could come to the microphone, if we could just ask you to turn it on so it's green. Yes, either one. If you could state your name and address, and then Fabian will give you 3 minutes.
Good evening, Michael Owens, 374 Morton Street. First, I'd like to thank the school committee members who were able to take time out of their schedules over the last 2 weeks to meet with members of the Stoughton homeschool community. Your desire to listen, ask questions, and understand what the law really says about homeschool policy in Massachusetts was greatly appreciated, and I look forward to you applying what you learned from us to tonight's meeting. Secondly, as a public school educator of 20 years, I would respectfully like to remind this school committee of their role in the district. Number one, the school committee is a legal agent of the state and must therefore fulfill both state and federal mandates. Number two, the school committee must be responsive to the community it serves. Number three, the school committee is a legislative body that develops, evaluates, and oversees education policies. It does not rubber stamp policies that the superintendent or his administrators attempt to squeak by. Number four, the superintendent is the educator chosen by the board to implement the policies set by the school committee. The superintendent and his administrators work for you, not the other way around. As an educator, I have seen many superintendents and school committee members come and go in my own district. The most successful were the ones who knew each other's respective roles and respected the boundaries of their positions. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person on the list, Peter and Patrice Danino. Again, if you could give your name and address, sure. And then Fabian will give you 3 minutes.
Patrice and Peter Danino, 583 Morton Street. I'm just here tonight to just let you know that we're new to homeschooling starting last year for our daughter, and she used to attend a private Catholic school. We chose to bring her to homeschooling. From the point that we sent in our intent letter to Jonathan Ford, we were met with, welcome to Stoughton. We've both lived here our entire lives. My husband's on Stoughton Fire Department 34 years, and his family owns a business that's been here for 70 years. I thought that was a little, okay, different. So from there it was, we were requested to come in for a meeting, which I knew the law. It's not required. So we hired an attorney. We were forced to hire an attorney, and I'm glad that we did, because we were met with multiple times between Mr. Ford and our attorneys asking for more things outside of the scope of the law, whether we would agree to do a standardized testing, and I knew that wasn't necessary. So we did not agree to that. This was dragged out from 7 months, and finally, because we were concerned it was coming up on June, the attorney said, would you agree to come in for a meeting? I'm immune compromised, that's why I'm wearing a mask. I don't go into closed spaces usually, but I felt tonight was necessary to do this. But I said, we'll do it if we could do it virtually. We got a response back, we don't have the capabilities. After COVID, I know there are capabilities. Please don't tell us there aren't capabilities. There is. Then it was, could you provide a doctor's note? Because apparently an adult's word is not good enough. So my doctor, who I had to reach out to, provided a note, which I think is beyond HIPAA, and I think it's a violation, but I provided it just so that we could get our intent letter approved onto the next year. We did a meeting with our attorneys present, because I would not do it alone after the numerous times being requested to do things, and finally came to an agreement and got the approval, and then agreed to sending in our new policy, our new intent, and we have heard nothing. We sent in our progress reports as required. I feel like, I just would request going back to the original plan. I strongly, strongly suggest it, because I still have attorneys. I will continue to use them as long as I need to. And I would suggest everybody here, if you need it, hire attorneys.
Please remember, you're addressing the chair of the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. The next item on our agenda, thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is the superintendent update. I turn it over to Dr. Baeta.
Thank you, folks. Good evening. Just a couple of short things. Just in from the committee, received on the 24th, the UFCW Local 7091, the Paraprofessionals Union has asked to go into negotiations starting late September, early October. I believe the committee is aware of that in terms of the general discussions we've had. I don't believe, and please correct me, I don't see a name somewhere of who that representative from the school committee will be.
We were going to nominate that next meeting. It's not on the agenda for today. So
Exactly. So I just want to make sure that we get it on the agenda for the next meeting, so you can start thinking about who's going to be the, typically I believe it's one member.
Yes.
The second is I met with the 300th anniversary committee for the town's celebration in 2026. That committee is chaired by Miss Joanne Callanan, and Mr. David Allen Lambert is the vice chair, and Dr. Patricia Randolph is the committee secretary, and Mrs. Sewick is involved as part of the subcommittee. So I met with Ms. Callanan and Mrs. Sewick, and so I'll be putting together kind of a list of events for the school department to be involved in the celebration of Stoughton's 300th. It'll start this year with a t-shirt logo contest that will run in K through 12 out of our art program, so I'll be meeting with the art folks to do that. Moves into the following year into historical essay on a famous Stoughtonian, student awards in 26, YMCA walkathon in 26, family Zumba in 26, in multiple school sites, and so on and so on. It culminates with both a ball in May of 26 and a parade, it looks like, in June of 26. So the school department will be pretty significantly involved as volunteers and having our students celebrate Stoughton's 300. The special town meeting dates are the 6th of November and 8th of November. I'll write this in a memo to you as well. The 13th of November and the 15th of November. And they will be at OMS. And I want to thank the town clerk, the town manager, and the town moderator, because it would have been a significant impact at the high school during those dates as they're preparing for the winter presentations and musicals and all that stuff. So it'll be at OMS, more information to come. And I've asked Joyce and our new AD, Robin, to look at pickleball. So we will be coming back to you with some thoughts and ideas of the best location, including some discussion about the new tennis courts at the high school and the back too, and trying to set something up. We'll have to bring in somebody that help us with that in terms of doing it the right way. And there's a couple of other sites we want to look at in town as well that may be a good place. We're going to reach out to the rec department and see if we can make this a school rec department activity. And that's all I have for you. Just one last thing. You received communication from me about a professional development with MASC. I'll send that out for a final decision. That looks like it's going to be the 7th of September from 6 to 7:30, or even 6:30 to 8 o'clock if that's better for people because you're traveling. So I'll get a final date to you so you can say yes or no to it. So I believe Glenn Kuchar, the MASC Executive Director, will be doing that with you. And that's not a posted meeting, it's a professional development. You're not voting or anything or contending anything. It's just a training. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I know our viewer who was very interested in pickleball, will be very happy to hear the updates, so he's been very
And
enthusiastic
I'll
about that.
communicate with the gentleman that communicated with me and then with you tomorrow.
Great,
Just to let
perfect.
them know this is a plan.
All right, thank you. All right, any questions or comments for the superintendent?
No.
All right. Moving on to new business. The first item is special town meeting articles. You just heard Dr. Bayetta provide the dates for the special town meeting starting on November 6th. The warrant for that closes on September 5th. At this time, the school committee is not planning to submit any articles to the special town meeting. That's all I have on that. Do you have anything?
I do not. I
Okay.
just, coming new, right now at this time, most of the, remember to hit that. Most of the articles that I'm seeing so far are collective bargaining issues on the town side. I'm sure there's gonna be other stuff as well before it closes, but right now, we don't have any.
And we definitely made a point that we know that we are going to be asking for the new elementary school building in the spring. We did not ask for an increase to our budget the past regular town meeting. We may have to do that this coming town meeting. So we are definitely being very thoughtful about the money we are asking from the town, fully aware that these expenses are potentially coming down the line. Any questions on the special town meeting? Nope. All right, that was easy. The next item on the agenda, this is a new practice for us, but best practice is to vote to accept the warrants, which we have signed. So if I could have a motion to approve the warrants.
So moved.
All right, so the motion was made by Chris Shannon. Second?
Second.
The motion was seconded by Lindsay Kreckler. The motion's been moved and seconded. Vote, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. All right, the motion is carried 5-0. The next item on the list on the agenda is the acceptance of the minutes from August 15th, 2023. At this time, I'd like to ask for amendments or corrections for the minutes from August 15th.
The only one I have is on the first page, mom of 7, to remove that.
Okay, yes, we have a
And twice,
duplicate on that. I had a couple. One was on the superintendent update. For it noted that there will be, is it more intramural clubs or extramural? Intramural, yes, it does make a difference. So intramural on the second page under the superintendent update. I also wanted to note under new business for the elementary school building project update, instead of the preferred option, it's the preferred schematic report. Because we've already chosen the option, this is the report. And then under the paraprofessionals vote, the second sentence, for this year only, instead of the paras will be moved, is the proposal, correct?
Correct.
Will be. So they were not currently para 3. The proposal is to move it to para 3. And then at the bottom, under acceptance of minutes, July 26th, first paragraph, the policy, we actually have a working group instead of a subcommittee for policy. So I would correct that. And then the last line, again, the next school building committee was going to vote on the preferred schematic report for submission. So those are my amendments. I will have these scanned and submitted to our recording secretary. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
So moved.
All right, so that was a motion made by Lindsay. Second? I'll give it to Armando. I haven't given you one yet. So motion was seconded by Armando Rosa. The motion has been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right, the motion is carried 5-0. All right. I'm sorry, I need to get organized here. The next item on the agenda is old business, and the first thing up is the MOA for the paraprofessionals. This was presented at the last meeting. We had a little bit of confusion about the process, and I think we've cleared that up. How we go about this, that if we agree to open the contract, we have a negotiation subcommittee. We don't have that one for the para. That was part of the confusion. The subcommittee will report back to the full committee. We bring back the contract for a vote, as Lindsay did with Unit B last time. And the full committee in executive session votes on the financial parameters. So now that I've gotten that straightened up, I think we're ready to discuss it, to put a motion on the table to approve or not approve this and then discuss it. So is there a motion to approve the memorandum of agreement with the paraprofessionals?
Move to approve the memorandum of agreement with the paraprofessionals.
All right, so that motion was made by Lindsay Kreckler. Is there a second?
Second.
That was seconded by Chris Shannon. Motion has been moved and seconded. Any technical questions on this? I know we discussed it a little bit last time, but if anybody has any remaining questions on this.
I'll just say my questions, I think we're all about the process and we've sort of addressed
Yes,
that. So
yes, yeah,
thank you
it was-
for
That was more, part of the confusion was that the active negotiation team has the chair and the vice chair, and so we were confused about what capacity we were. We wear so many hats in this, but we've gotten it cleared up. Any debate or discussion of this? All right, so all in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, the motion has carried 5-0.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes.
So the process that I believe we're going to be using is I'll communicate, for example, if it's Lindsay, through the chair to Lindsay
Yes.
about I received something or you may be receiving something, and then we'll do that for the para group as well, and of course, all the other ones.
Right.
Okay?
Yes.
Thank you.
So, just establishing who says what, and again, it's confusing because we have so many hats, and we're all learning how many hats we wear now,
You
so.
can just sign one of those.
Okay.
On behalf of
Okay.
the date, please.
Sure. I should know what today's date is.
29th.
I know. It's been a week. All right. All right, the next item on the agenda is the school committee policies, IHBG, home education, IHBG-R-1, home education administrative procedure. I put these policies on the agenda so we can address two issues with regards to these policies. One is the voting procedures, specifically from the 26th, and the other is the policies themselves, as we've had a number of parents reach out to us with comments and questions. We have a couple ways to proceed about this. We can redo the vote. We can also rescind the vote and move this back to our working group for review, and then go through the process and making sure that we tick all the boxes this time. When we bring these policies forward, they come from the working group. The working group then recommends this to the full committee for a first reading. If we choose to waive the first reading, we vote clearly to do so. We then have a second reading at a subsequent meeting and followed by a vote. And then the policies are clearly noted as action items on the agendas for those meetings. Does anybody have a motion to put on the table? And then we can start our discussion and debate.
I'd like to make the motion to rescind the vote.
I second.
All right, so the motion was made by Armando Barbosa, and the second was made by Chris Shannon. If we rescind the vote, we would restore the IHBG policy predating that vote, which is the one that was previously in place. Is there a different motion on the table? Anybody want to make a different motion? All right. Any technical questions on this?
Yeah, just to clarify, sorry, I want to make sure I have the sequence right. Yeah, so we had voted to approve the policy amendments because there was some concern about the timeline, but given all of the feedback we've received from the community and from the district, I think like this makes sense. And then, so we would refer this back to the policy working group to revisit.
Yes.
And then from there, it would come back to the committee after discussion and
Correct.
revisiting, and we would follow that process after that.
Yes, yes. So
Thank
that would
you.
be the best, talking with legal counsel, that would be the clearest way to make sure that we do this properly. We're all relatively inexperienced on this committee, sorry, it is the way it is. So we kind of need to take some time to make sure that we tick all the boxes, learn these processes, that we follow all the processes and policies, and that we understand what we're putting forward. So that was the recommendation, to kind of step back, redo the process in full. And then that way it was clear, and if people have issues with the policy, then the issues are with the policy itself and not with the process and that sort of thing. So that was the idea.
Thank you.
Any other questions before moving on to debate? Fabian?
We can ask technical questions?
Yes.
I have a technical question on
Sure.
the administrative process. And number 3, it's kind of vague where it says the superintendent or designee will provide notification to parents regarding the acceptance or rejection of the home education proposal within a reasonable amount of time. Can we quantify what's reasonable? I mean, like, is it 30 days, 14 days, 6 months?
So for us, in doing the home education piece, when it comes in, is actually would affect our ability to get something that came in early August. There's a lot more time, whereas something that comes right now becomes more difficult because federal grants and everything else coming through. You can just put in what the expectation, we can say 7 days.
Okay.
I mean, that would be reasonable for me.
Another question I have, would there be circumstances where it would be denied, and once it's denied, like, what's the process?
All right, so what the policy in and of itself?
The proposal, the education
proposal was
plan.
in, didn't meet expectations, we would just, generally, I just send an email back to parents. Some parents I call, let them know what the situation is, and generally, it's just submitted a form and resolve all. I mean, the biggest issues we generally have are just little things, which aren't a big deal. And people just, we fill out forms, submit, and resubmit. I mean, this is more formal. The problem historically we've had is the school committee set a policy, and it was a general policy which is, easy to implement and also easy to make changes to. But they also, instead of deferring the procedure to the district, there was a procedure set by the committee. And the biggest point of contention historically we've had is the in-person meeting. And while the school committee's policy didn't contain that requirement, the policy is a general framework that then the district utilizes to implement the policy, so the procedure. And the district has the latitude to implement whatever procedure they like, provided they don't violate the policy. So you can ask for more as long as it's not a violation of the policy. What set this particular policy apart in terms of the procedure is the procedure was actually set by the committee informally. So like my directives with regard to implementing the last policy was given to me by the school committee and not by the superintendent. But that creates a disconnect between the policy and people that read the policy on what we're supposed to do. And, it creates issues because, that's not in the policy, but it doesn't have to be in the policy, provided what the district does to set the procedure doesn't violate the policy. And the expectations, and I'm going to say specifically to an in-person meeting, was given by the school committee, as it didn't violate their policy and didn't violate Charles. Now, in looking at this particular policy, the reason this is more scripted is it's a direct draw from Charles, so that the issue that we've had in the past is addressed. And there isn't a set of expectations handed down that's not done in public for everyone to see, because then this would require to go back to the school committee to be approved, modified, or whatever. And it addresses, I think, the biggest disconnect we have within or between Stoughton Public Schools and our local homeschooling community. So that explains why this is much more detailed. And basically, it just goes right back to Charles, because Charles is not in dispute. Interpretations of Charles can be, everybody can take their own interpretation, but the language itself, if it's embedded in the policy, it is what it is. And then it doesn't put us in a position where there's misunderstandings in terms of what does the policy mean or what is the implementation. Everything's just right back on the table.
Ask a couple of questions of the committee.
Sure.
So can we define the working group, just for public record?
So the working group, we have usually 2 members of the committee are on the working group, and they meet, generally there's a member of the administration invited to attend as well, to discuss policy. It's different than a subcommittee in that the subcommittees that we have to follow filing of the meetings and all of that. So that's my understanding of the working group, because that is.
And who are going to be the two school committee reps, I'm sorry to ask?
Right now, we only have one
Right.
on there as Armando, and we have not yet appointed a second member to that.
So I'm going to guess you're going to put that as an agenda item
Yes.
at your next meeting?
That's an agenda item for the next meeting. Since that's not on the agenda right now, I'm not going to do it right now.
Okay. Second question that I have is in doing and receiving information from the public, is the committee willing to share that with the superintendent? I don't need names, I don't need addresses, I just need, what were the thoughts? To me, it's about finding out more about this. I haven't had this type of back and forth, if you will, previously, so I want to learn more about what these folks are talking about in terms of what they gave for you for information. So, and again, I don't need names, I don't need addresses, I don't need anything, but if you're willing to share it, it'd be good for me to have it.
I got an anonymous email that I can share, there's no names attached to it.
Great, that'd be great.
I can compile the emails that we've gotten.
And again, we're not going to do anything until the 12th, so as long as I get it before then, it gives me another framework of what's going on.
So that's action item D. Any other technical questions before we move on to discussion or debate? Right, discussion and debate. Any discussion or debate, Chris?
I would just say, I think it makes sense to like kind of press pause by rescinding and reverting to the previous policy, and then put the, just make sure we're completely clear and aligned, and have done the research. I know, not to say that it hasn't already happened, because I know that it certainly has, but just to make sure that it's like super thorough, and we're, so I'll leave it there.
Yeah, this is our first time putting a new policy, and given our relative experience,
Yeah.
I think that it behooves us to make sure that we understand the whole process of putting together policy and making sure that we've dotted all our i's and crossed our t's. And I know that we've gotten a lot of information from Mr. Ford and the administration. We've gotten a lot of information from parents, and I think it's a matter of us compiling it and going to a working group and really working through that process and getting to know how this works. So that's my thought. All right, are we ready to vote? So the motion on the table is to rescind the vote of July 26th, approving IHBG and IHBG-R-1, and to restore the IHBG policy predating the July 26th vote. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, the motion has carried 5-0.
Could I ask for some clarification,
Yes.
please? So under the previous policy, for going back to it, I was given a clear expectation that I would be conducting in-person meetings. And that was to facilitate the review and evaluation process and potentially any kind of conflict when people turn in their review and evaluation materials the previous year. Now, I've already approved 10 families' plans this year without conducting that meeting. So is there an expectation that I'm going to re-implement that expectation, or is that expectation waived moving forward?
I guess, what was the timeline?
So in the past, part of the approval process was that we had to have a meeting with home education families.
Mhm.
Now, in implementing the new process, we're not required to have those meetings.
Mhm.
So it's just download the form, fill out the form, send it to me, if everything looks good, sign off on the form. If there are adjustments, you get an email back, like maybe you put in the wrong hours or something. But with the old form, if we're going back to it, there still is an expectation of me, as the designee of the superintendent, that we conduct in-person meetings in order to approve home education plans. So in implementing the old plan, does that expectation still stand, or is that expectation waived? Because if it still stands, I'd need to reach out to the 10 families that I've already approved their plans and schedule a meeting. Do we waive that for those families, or do we leave it intact for the other families moving forward? Because that has historically been a point of contention between the Stoughton Public Schools and our homeschooling community. Or, some families, most families just, but,
It would seem the logical thing is to just waive it since we've proceeded.
which would be much easier for me.
Yeah.
So that I wouldn't have to reach out to these other families.
Could you shed some light on why it was put in place in the first place? The whole in-person meeting, what
So when
they say?
So in my initial, we've had two big conversations about how we implement the policy over the years. One, when I first got the job with the school committee that hired me, and once when we redid the policy manual, and they chose to leave the existing policy in place, but they shifted from a memorandum of agreement to a form, and that addressed issues we were having with, like, what we're getting in, because there were a lot of things that came in I just couldn't approve, and it created like a huge back and forth. It took a lot of time. And so we made that adjustment. In the initial meetings, it was, you need to have that meeting just to agree upon, because the policy said you need to come to an agreement on what the review and evaluation component was. And doing it, somebody saying something and having to go back and forth, or doing it through email or whatever it might be, it's just a lot of time and a lot of effort, when it's easier just to have a meeting. Because if you have to come to an agreement on something, it's just easier in person. So there was always that expectation. And also, if you had concerns about the materials that were produced, having a meeting, like when you're approving the new form, people submit the information, then you could have that conversation, because it's always more productive than just trying to do 10,000 emails back and forth. So that's where that came from. So in going to the new policy, we talked about the standardized assessment piece, because that alleviates the need to actually come to a consensus or agreement. You don't need to have an in-person meeting. And because you don't have to go back and then potentially go through what's submitted, what meets threshold or whatever, it's all been waived. So moving forward, the standardized testing piece got rid of that. So for the families that we've had so far, most just pick one, or like a lot of families use the MAP, which is an NWA assessment. And for the families with first and second grade, because we talked last year, and I went to Joe to see if it's okay to put in the piece where like first and second grade families can just submit like dated work samples and a progress report. So we went through that whole piece. But none of those people had to come in for a meeting because it's not necessary. Because everything's it's drafted out, and it's just a clear expectation.
So is it a problem if we left it up to the families to decide whether they wanted to come in and have that conversation?
Well, for me, I'm just implementing.
I'm just saying a happy medium.
Well, if it's easier if you have to come to a consensus on an item to have a meeting. People that do standardized testing, it doesn't. We have a lot of families that use the staff of 10. We have some families who use the Iowa, a couple who use the math. It's just simple. There's nothing to talk about, because they just get their results back. They send them in, there they are, good to go. But for the other piece, with like dated work samples and progress reports, we've had a trend over the last few years where people sending in progress reports will just write the subjects and say adequate progress. Now, that doesn't meet the threshold established in Charles in that initial lines when they talk about assessment and like what a standardized testing would provide the district. It doesn't give us that. And, it would be beneficial to have that discussion if we're going in that particular route, so that we can clarify what the expectations are. In particular, what we've seen over the last few years, where there's like no information provided. And, that would be beneficial. But the standardized assessment is, there's nothing to talk about. It's just cut and dry. And that's one of the things that actually led up into discussions last year and this year with regard to what the policy would look like. Why it's just a revert back to Charles, it just clears everything up.
Yeah, I think I see the advantage of standardized testing. That is, you have the data. Then students are meeting the minimum standard that the state requires the school to make sure it happens. But some families don't want to meet, but don't want the standardized testing, so I think that's where the rubber hits the road. And I guess the working committee is going to have to somehow fix that as the biggest point of contention.
Well, you can look, the committee's going to make the determination of how we move forward. And as school district administrators, we're going to implement what you ask us to do. I mean, that's how this works. But for me, as the superintendent's designee, I've been given an expectation. I just kind of want to know whether that expectation carries over to re-implementing the policy, or is there a different expectation from this particular committee? So I know what to convey to the people. Yes.
So a couple of clarifications. From what I've heard so far from public comment and from emails, it's not a reluctance to attend the meeting, it's just the reluctance to attend in person, is my understanding. So that's what I understand is the.
So we had moved to allowing, we waived meetings, and then we allowed in-person meetings, but there was a point where there was a decision made within the district that all the in-person meetings were eliminated. We're going back to 100% in-person meetings.
Mhm.
At which point, that's what we did.
But based on what I've heard, and maybe I'm not hearing everything from the families that have been speaking about this issue, I just wanted to address a comment made, from the school committee, that it's not, there's a reluctance to have that meeting, it's just a reluctance to have that meeting in person. Am I correct there, my recollection?
And coming back to this conversation,
Yeah,
if you provide me with the expectation,
right.
that's what we have.
Right. Yeah, I'm just clarifying school committee comment, but a comment that you had made in regard to the previously existing policy was that there was no expectation in the policy for an in-person meeting. That was just part of the procedure. So if we revert back to the previous policy, there's nothing in the policy, to my understanding, that requires that in-person meeting, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And what required, and why we implemented the in-person meeting prior to COVID was what I mentioned. It was a directive.
Right.
Given in terms of the expectation in implementing the policy.
Yeah.
Now, when COVID hit, we eliminated the meetings because we weren't having meetings with anyone
Right.
for a year. But then when we came back, there was a shift within the district. We went to all the online instruction, all virtual meetings.
Mhm.
But then there was a clear directive that came, everything was shifting back to in-person.
Mhm.
Like all of our meetings in district,
Right.
within our leadership team, within the community, even like our LPAC and our CPAC. And that's how that came back to this point.
Right.
So, I mean, if the committee wanted to say you can hold virtual meetings, because this has never been a conversation we had in public policy just stood, and there was a directive given. And when things came up, we might take it back to the policy group,
Mhm.
or take the superintendent and ask X, Y, and Z.
Mhm.
But it just comes down to what is the expectation for implementing the policy.
Right. So I was just, so I say that as a preface to the question that you asked, if we're reverting back to the previous policy, are we waiving those meetings? To me, if those meetings were not inherent in that previous policy, then personally, I don't see an issue with waiving those meetings for those families, because they're not inherent in the policy. So, and unless another school committee member has a different opinion, which is fine.
No, I'm just considering like the families, whether it was beneficial to them or not. If they found it beneficial and stuff, we're waiving it to comply with the policy. However, are we doing a detriment to them? Because this is all in the interim until we meet
Yeah,
back
exactly.
up and see what the working group has.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, how many families do you have to meet, I guess, from now until the date?
Generally, it's about 25 a year.
And you've done 10, you said?
I've had 10 families just submit the new documentation and we just approve it. So it's like, takes me about 10 minutes unless, sometimes there's something like time on learning isn't, like somebody put in 108 by mistake. They just, resubmit the form. Been really clean, but I mean, the new process is, for me, having what we've already experienced this year, it's spectacular. It's not a huge time investment on our part, which in the past it's a lot of hours.
Thank you for that.
So we need to establish, I'm going to be part of this working group now. We need to establish a way for you to be able to meet with these parents and pretty much say, your child or whoever you're guiding is meeting the Massachusetts required minimum standard.
So it's not, so we don't really want to rate and evaluate our home education families. That's not our business. People have the right to educate the kids at home, good for them. It's a ton of work. What we have is there's a line in Charles, and it comes under where the district can require standardized testing. We need to go ahead and check to ensure X, Y, and Z is happening, that kids are making adequate progress.
Right.
I mean, what's nice about a standard is just cut and dry, you know, and really, in the interest of the district, it gives parents that are homeschooling an idea of where their kids stack up against everybody else on a national norm assessment. It's good information. Do we have a point where we say, you know, I need to see this score? No, we don't. I mean, we don't want to be in that business. But for us, in meeting our statutory responsibilities as defined by Charles, it allows us to do so in a very clean manner. And it's like work samples, you know, you're never going to get enough work samples to make that determination. I mean, it would take a lot of materials. And am I going to then pull my curriculum specialists out to go through that specialized in elementary or secondary? It's an unbelievable amount of time. I mean, it's just really clean for us, to be perfectly honest. And you know, the new process for me, it's simple, straightforward. It's not, I don't find it invasive. Nobody has to come in and meet. Everything's just clean. It works well. I mean, it also goes to the question, I mean, we had a standardized form that was previously approved by the committee. We put a new piece in place. Can we still use those as well? Because they seem to work for the people that submitted them. And then just everything that's in is good to go.
All right, so do we need to vote on waiving, whether or not to waive the in-person meetings, and then whether or not to continue using the forms? Is that
It's never been voted before. You can just give me a direct.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah, we don't need to vote on
Let's do
that.
it.
Just discussion.
And this goes back, well, this goes right back, I think the disconnect we've had historically, is the policy is the policy. It's the district determines the procedures to implement policies, right? And you know, not everybody understands how things function in education, and the disconnect between the policy and procedure, or the connect. And in the past, this has just been a directive in terms of the policy working group, or just the chair of the school committee. And in this case, you know, if the chair just wanted to instruct me to waive that particular piece, that would be just fine, because this isn't changing the policy, which is what you would have to vote to do. It can simply be an expectation given to me as an agent of the superintendent to implement your policy.
I would like the opinion of the committee before I make my directive. Do you see benefits to waiving this meeting until?
At the moment, I do. I think it's in the best interest of the families. We don't want to switch horses midstream in terms of processes for them, especially if they've already gone through an approval process. I think it would be unfair to them to then come back and say, oh, sorry, the process has changed and now you have to do it again. It's not an easy decision to homeschool, and it is a lot of work and a lot of paperwork and a lot of prep, and I want to honor that on behalf of the families for now until we can get our ducks in a row and can move forward with a clear policy and justification for that policy going forward. So I think the working group, you know, has more data collection and research to do to make sure that we have a fully informed policy going forward.
So a couple of things, if I may, with the potential discussion on the change. I don't know, under power of authority, the school committee chair has the authority to give an assistant superintendent authority to do something. Not that I want any more authority, I've already been blamed for that, but, so please, if you decide to do that, just tell me and I'll make sure it takes place. However, that said, for practice sake, and since you have had folks reach out to you, I would like to see at least a consensus of the committee that the chair will be seeking me out to make sure that this happens. Because you are an elected body, right? Not appointed. Consensus would be enough for me. I know we don't need to get into power plays and all that stuff, but we just want to set the standard in terms of making sure that you know, I work on behalf of the committee, I work for the committee, so I want to make sure that when I get those directives, I can clearly make sure that they're taking place, so that he's also the person that's getting it for me at the same time. And of course, it was in a public meeting, so it's pretty clear cut. So that's all I'm asking for.
That sounds reasonable. I'm not going to speak on behalf of the committee without their approval, so I wanted to let you know that.
I'll just say, I feel like our chair, Catherine, has done a lot of work to like really embody a lifelong learner mindset here around like gathering information from many, many sources. I would feel very comfortable with her sharing all of that information that she has learned from community members, from district employees, back with Dr. Bayetta in order to move forward in that way.
Thank you. All right, so the action right now is do we need to debate the consensus, or do we just?
No.
We'll just get it in writing from you to me, and we'll
Alright.
make sure it takes place.
All right, sounds good.
Are there any differing viewpoints in the school committee?
Yes, that's a good question. Any different, anyone who's, no. I'm fine if you say don't.
Yeah, and you can date it if you want,
Okay.
pending until September 12th, and then you maybe be doing something else on that date.
True.
So
Okay, all right.
it doesn't have to be something that stands forever, it could be just something that you want to see as a consensus to try to get this moving along.
Okay.
Um, You can take your vote, Art. I think you already rescinded.
Yes, we did.
So I just want to, if I may, Madam Chair, take 2 seconds of the time, since our homeschool parents are here. So I just want to be really, really clear. This is the first time I've gone through this process with a back and forth between the committee and the school department and parents. And recognizing that some information came forward under open meeting law that I received, I believe I received it today or yesterday. I want to be really straightforward and sincere with the parents. Didn't know the contentious issues taking place, so let me put that on the table. Want to learn more about you and what you're trying to accomplish, because my job is to get this stuff done. And I put a date on there, literally, because I was thinking that it's good for both parties. It wasn't just, from my perspective, it was if we get things done. I recognize kids go on homeschooling in November or December or January, but I was trying to say, if we have this date, then both parties can really get this done and everybody's happy before school starts. That was my intent, nothing to read in between there. As you get to know me, you'll probably know that I'm pretty straightforward. And then directly, I should have given better advice to the committee at that time. I didn't, that's on me, I own it, I've communicated that to the chair already. So I just want to add that to the public record for the perspective of what this administration wants to accomplish while I'm superintendent. Thank you.
Okay, appreciate that. All right, moving on to actually what will be hopefully a very short discussion is the elementary school building project update and responsibilities. I just wanted to say that the team is on track to submit the PSR, the Preferred Schematic Report, to the MSBA, the Massachusetts School Building Authority, this Thursday, August 31st, in time to meet the deadline. Yay! That's all I have for now. The next building committee meeting is Wednesday, September 13th at 7 p.m. at the school committee conference room here in the district office. Any questions about the elementary school building project?
Just
We're done
an
for-
addition real quick.
Yes.
Going to MSBA either on the 13th or 27th. Looks
Yes.
like it's going to be the 13th.
The 13th.
Looks like it's going to be,
Looks like
so
it.
just let you know.
That's correct. We are going to be presenting, that's the next step. We're not, the school committee's not involved, but the building committee needs to do that. Other matters, I do have one other matter to mention. We received open meeting law violation complaints. They came in after the deadline for posting the agenda for this meeting. As a chair, I've disseminated those copies to all of our members of the public body, and we will meet to review those complaints on September 12th, 2023, which is within the 14 business days of the receipt of those. So no questions on this right now. It's not on the agenda. I'm not going to talk about it now. Does anybody have any other matters or correspondence to discuss? We already mentioned the pickleball.
You're invited to the first day of school if you're able to make it. Some breakfast starting at 7, convocation starts at 8 o'clock. Please come join all of us as we begin the new school year. It'll be at the high school auditorium.
All right, thank you. If there are no other matters, I would like to note that the next regular meeting of the school committee is Tuesday, September 12th at 7 p.m. here in the school committee conference room, district offices. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right. It was a tie. It was between Lindsay and Chris.
Chris can have it.
Okay, Chris can have it. All right. Lindsay, would you like to second?
Second.
All right. The motion is moved by Chris, seconded by Lindsay. Moved and seconded. Roll call vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, the motion is carried 5-0. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for coming. Have a safe and happy and great weekend. Great start to the school year and good night.